There are women and men who are in a marriage who are being domestically abused and won't leave. And they'll let it happen again and again. And so I want them to know, I want you to know that it is okay. Quite frankly, it's your decision, so it's okay if you want to stay too, but you don't have to. And domestic violence might be my only personal reason that is absolute that says your marriage should end. You do not and should not be in a marriage where you are the victim of domestic violence.
Welcome to Gavels Down, Voices Up, where we flip the script on conventional legal discussions. I'm Rachel King, here to guide you through the murky waters of family law, estate conflicts, inheritance disputes, all of the dramas. We're not just talking about law, we're talking about how it affects your life, your rights, your future, and your money. From the courtroom to your living room, we bring you insights that matter. Dive into each episode ready to challenge, learn, and grow. Ready to change the dialogue? Let's begin. Gavels down, voices up.
Why should you get divorced and when is the right time? Probably one of the biggest questions that I get asked, which is odd because I'm not a therapist, I'm an attorney. But I hear it a lot. And maybe that's why they call us counselors as well as attorneys. I talk about it a lot in my new book, Getting Divorced Now What, which is available. You can go over to the website, gettingdivorcednowwhat.com, to get a free chapter or to buy it. But here's what I say. If you are over your marriage, no matter what your spouse does, you can't participate in the marriage anymore, it's really time to get divorced. And that looks different for everybody. I have seen situations where me as a married person thinks, oh gosh, I don't know if I would divorce my spouse over that. That seems like that wouldn't really do it for me. But it's not my marriage, so, it's not me. And I've also seen situations where I'm like, oh my gosh, you need to get out of here and run. And for whatever reason, they don't. I've had people that have filed for divorce and then canceled. I've had a few people that have gotten divorced and got remarried. Maybe that means they did it a little bit premature. In any case, I don't think that there's any particular standout reason about when you should get divorced, except I hope for everybody listening that if you are the victim of domestic violence, then you understand that it is okay to get divorced and it's time. And I say that knowing, because I've represented them, that there are women and men who are in a marriage who are being domestically abused and won't leave. And they'll let it happen again and again. And so I want them to know, I want you to know that it is okay. Quite frankly, it's your decision, so it's okay if you want to stay too, but you don't have to. And domestic violence might be my only personal reason that is absolute that says your marriage should end. You do not and should not be in a marriage where you are the victim of domestic violence. But what happens? So when you are the victim of domestic violence, of course, you can call the authorities. Maybe you have called the police. Maybe you haven't called the police. You can be afraid of what's going to happen financially. You can be the victim of domestic violence by coercive control or being completely cut off by finances, which is totally different than if you're getting punched in the face or strangled. Both are domestic violence, and both can make you feel trapped, whether it's because you think you're going to get killed or you think, oh my gosh, I'm going to be cut off financially, I can't survive. I've even represented and heard of people that don't leave because they are so scared that they're going to not have a relationship with their children anymore, that their spouse will take off with the kids, or that they're going to be deported for immigration statuses. All of them are fair and reasonable and, horrible that you're feeling that way, but none of them really stand up in court. Actually, if somebody is threatening immigration for divorce, that is considered domestic violence and you can get a restraining order against them. If somebody is cutting off your credit card saying, I'm not going to let you have any money, they have complete control. That is also a form of domestic violence and you can get a restraining order. Threatening to take off with the kids, not okay. And then of course, physical violence is not all right either. When we're talking about domestic violence in a divorce, the divorce process itself is exactly the same as if there was no domestic violence. But there's a couple areas that really are affected by the existence of domestic violence. And before I get into those, I want to stop and say that the hardest thing that I've dealt with as an attorney when it comes to domestic violence is where victims for the duration of the marriage have been abused but have not told anybody. Haven't called the police, haven't told friends, have covered up with makeup, have stayed in the house, whatever it is, they just have been totally silent to the existence. And this is really hard as an attorney because we know it happened, but we have no evidence. And in fact, the counter side, the abuser or the abuser's attorney are going to look at you and say, really? So you were abused, huh? And you never told anybody and you never called anybody? And you're going to be like, yes, because I was afraid. And honestly, many times the court will be like, yeah, we don't have enough evidence to support the history of domestic violence. So to the extent that if you are the victim of domestic violence, you can get out, or you can call the police, you can have some kind of report, documentation, notes, pictures, whatever it is of your domestic violence, that will help your case. All right, so what is affected in a divorce when there is a finding of domestic violence? First, if you can get a restraining order, then it's going to affect custody, visitation, and spousal support. It may also affect other things like your right to continue to live in the house exclusively, at least until it's divided. It may allow you some additional privileges with regard to how the divorce is going to be handled, again, like being able to have the car or things like that. But what it's not going to do, you're not going to get more assets in the division of assets because you were the victim of domestic violence. And I once represented a client who was horrifically abused. There was criminal cases with guilty verdicts, the whole nine, and domestic violence restraining orders, criminal protective orders, arrests, incarcerations, the whole thing. And she was really sad because when she came into my office, she said, I just want the house. And I said, well, you don't get the house. The house has $500,000 worth of equity in it, and you can't afford to buy out your ex. And she's like, but he did all of these things to me. And I said, I know, I'm really sorry. You don't get the house. So you're not going to get the house. And he was kind of an ass, obviously, and wouldn't sign over the house to her. I was really trying to get her the house. But in any event, you're not going to necessarily get more of the assets as compensation because you were the victim. Just a moment for a quick break. Are you struggling with the legal and emotional tolls of divorce? Let me, Rachel King, help guide you. Head over to gettingdivorcednowwhat.com/free chapter for your copy of the first chapter of my new book, Getting Divorced Now What. Learn tips to navigate your divorce in the most successful way possible. The full book is coming out January 15th, and you can pre-order yours now. Now let's get back to the show. But if you're the higher breadwinner, right, you are the one that provided the support and you were also the victim of domestic violence, the court isn't going to order you to pay spousal support to your abuser because, my God, people don't like paying spousal support anyway. Talk about adding insult to injury. So if you have a domestic violence restraining order and you would normally be required to pay spousal support, there are laws that say, yeah, we're not going to make that happen. Also, if you have a restraining order, a domestic violence restraining order, and there are minor children, the court, there's a presumption, there's a law that says we're just going to make a presumption that the abuser should not have custody of the kids. They can overcome that. That's a little bit more detailed, but typically the courts are going to say, yes, sole legal, sole physical custody to the victim, to the parent that was the victim of domestic violence, because they don't want an abused. And then there's going to be some kind of visitation order, depending on how the domestic violence occurred. Was it in front of the kids? Did it involve the kids? Things like that. The court may have supervised visitation. The court may have unsupervised visitation. I have actually seen cases where a domestic violence restraining order was granted protecting husband, and then the kids still got an equal timeshare unsupervised with wife. Why? Because it was the kind of domestic violence and the circumstances really didn't make it likely that mom was going to be unsafe or unfit. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but that's what the judge did. And I've seen that more than one time. So that is a possibility. I haven't seen very often. I think I only saw it once or twice, definitely less than one hand, where there was absolutely no visitation. There was one circumstance where there was domestic violence. It was pretty bad. It involved the children also. And even there, where the court said no visitation, they left it up to the discretion of a therapist that was treating both the child and the parent. In that case, the parent never participated in the counseling, so there really was, it ended up being a no visitation as a result. But you can pretty much count on, if there is some kind of domestic violence restraining order, the victim isn't going to have to pay the abuser spousal support, that the victim is going to be the parent that is granted sole legal, sole physical custody, and that there will be some kind of limited or restrictions on visitation. This is one reason that domestic violence is used as a strategy tool, which I think is horrific. I don't think you should ever use domestic violence as a strategy tool. I think not only is it an abuse of the legal process, but I also think it is kind of insulting to all of the actual victims of domestic violence. But I'll get off my soapbox on that one. Now, let's say you're the victim of domestic violence, but you don't want a restraining order, or maybe you didn't get a restraining order. You couldn't meet the burden to prove that there was a restraining order necessary for the court, but maybe you still, or you do have enough evidence that can tell the court or show the court that there needs to be some kind of adjustments to the visitation or custody schedule. You can do that. If you have a domestic violence restraining order, some of these things are almost automatic. But if you don't have that, you can still adjust and still explain it to the court and hope that the court will make different orders or be a little bit more restrictive or protective of you and of the kids. You can get restraining orders to protect the kids. You can get restraining orders to protect other people that live in the family. If you are the victim of domestic violence and you should hands down call law enforcement. Get yourself to a safe place. There's so many resources out there. You can go in and get emergency court orders. You can go in and file for divorce. You can get the ball rolling. But remember, keep evidence, keep documentation, because I can't imagine anything more insulting than going and reliving all of the abuse you experienced to have the court, the other attorney, or your ex say, yeah, we don't believe you because there was no evidence. So keep that in mind. Nearly 20 people per minute are the victims of some kind of physical abuse. That is horrific. So let's talk then about what is a domestic violence issue, because just, being punched in the face by some dude down the street doesn't necessarily qualify for domestic violence. When we're talking about domestic violence, we're talking about violence that occurs between two people who have a familial or a relationship. So it could be a boyfriend and a girlfriend. It could be a mom and a child. It could be siblings. It could be grandparents and grandkids. It could be life partners. It's not roommates, and it's not friends that just exist. That is not what domestic violence is. It can be somebody that you have a one-night stand with, but it's not automatically somebody that you had a one-night stand with. It could be somebody that you went on a few dates with. So when we're talking about domestic violence, that's really important, because that's different than just abuse where you would get a civil harassment restraining order. Again, if you are the victim of domestic violence, take action. You do not need to be the victim. There are resources out there that can help you, and there are changes in the divorce law that will help give you ongoing protections.
That wraps up another episode of Gavels Down, Voices Up. If you found value in our discussion today, please subscribe, leave a review, and share with someone who needs these insights. Your engagement helps us grow and impact more lives. I'm Rachel King, thanking you for listening and reminding you to speak up, because every voice deserves to be heard.